KMSU.
Yes, this is Dustin.
Yes, this is Dustin. Is this Steve?
This is Steve.
Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing real good, man. How you doing?
I am doing excellent. I'm here with my co-host, Ton.
Hey there, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man.
Great. I'm glad to have you on the show here today.
Absolutely.
So, if you don't mind, we'll start off here just asking you some questions. I guess, how did you just start playing guitar? How did you get into that? Let's start there.
I don't know. Probably many, many reasons. But, I get asked that a lot. I don't know exactly where the absolute, interest or influence came from. I had a couple of aunts that played a little piano and played around. Nobody in my family at all played guitar. When my aunt got married, she married a guy who played a little bit of country fiddle and piano. And as the story has it, he bought a guitar because guys would show over to jam after church on Sunday, and some of them played guitars and they didn't have one, and so he bought one so there would be one there. That guitar, I'm looking at it, and it's getting ready to go into the Musicians Hall of Fame, which is going to be a new rendition of a museum, a Hall of Fame museum that had to go by the wayside for the new convention center here in Nashville. And in, the Stax part or somewhere down there, I'm going to donate this guitar. It's not the first guitar I owned, but it's the first guitar I ever picked up and actually played with it. So maybe that influenced me. A lot of my buddies in school played guitar, Charlie Freeman, some other guys, and I just said that's something I wanted to do. I went to my dad and said, Dad, I want a guitar. And he said, well, son, we can't afford a guitar. So I literally mowed as many yards as I could. I shined shoes. I set bowling pins. And I saved up about $17.95 and bought one, a flat-top guitar acoustic out of Sears and Roebuck catalog, when Sears was still called Sears and Roebuck. And they delivered it, and I started from there. I didn't know how to tune it and whatever, but I got some buddies to teach me, and that's where it all started.
That's awesome.
I kind of cheated on guitar lessons. I never did have very many anyway, but Charlie Freeman was a buddy of mine. He was taking guitar lessons from a guy in Memphis named Lynn Vernon, who was a very well-known guitar player, sort of a jazz player, multi-talented jazz guitar player. And so I would go home. His mother would pick him up at school and take him to have his guitar and take him to his guitar lessons. I would go home and get my little guitar, and I would be sitting on his front porch when his mom drove up with Charlie. And Charlie would show me what he just learned for the half an hour, which was kind of cool. And Charlie was glad to see that, and he had a buddy to spin off of. And, I'd play a little rhythm behind Charlie while he practiced his notes and scales and things that he had learned, and then we'd turn around and kind of jam together, and he'd show me what he'd learned. So I kind of came up by it dishonestly, as you might say. I cheated. So anyway, that same guy, I finally saved some money. My dad saw where I might have a little more interest, and what he told me was pretty astounding. He said, son, when he saw this guitar that I had bought from Sears, he said, you learn how to play that and I'll get you a real guitar, when he already said we couldn't afford one, which we couldn't. And lo and behold, for Christmas, they call me in there. My mom says, hey, we want to see you up front of the Christmas tree. And in front of the Christmas tree was a guitar case. And I went, oh my goodness, So I opened it up and there's an electric guitar in there. I think it was a 225. That guitar is up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame up in Cincinnati. And I don't know. I called Lynn and asked him if I could get some lessons. And on about the third lesson, he plays, turns the book, and he plays something. I don't know, something real simple. And he said, play that. I said, okay. So I played it. He said, I knew it all the time. He said, you played what I just played. I didn't play what was on that paper. He said, you can't read, and you'll never be able to read. So, he said, but I like the way you're interested in it, and I like the way you approach it. And he said, you can do us both a favor. He said, go home today, get 2 or 3 of your favorite songs, and bring them back in here next week, and I'll teach them to you. And I think one of them was Walk, Don't Run. I forget what the other one was, but that's kind of where I started, learning already recorded music.
And then from there, what led you to join up with Stax Records?
Well, we started a band, and a buddy of ours heard Charlie Freeman and I playing. And he was a little older than we were, but he hung around. We knew him. And he said, I'm good friends with this disc jockey downtown named Keith Sheriff. And I said, yeah, I know Keith. He said, yeah, he does all of the sock hops in town. And he said, you guys are good enough to be on his sock hops. He said, why don't I take you down there one night and have him audition you? So he set it up, and Charlie and I pile in a car, and we went down there. And we get to the studio, the old Rushwood Park baseball park. He was up on the second floor there, so we walk up and go in, and he said, guys, I don't have much room here in the control room, but I got a nice studio out there. He said, you guys just go out there and set up. He said, I've got a mic out there, and keep an eye on me when you get set up, and I'll point to you. And when I do, he said, just play whatever you're going to play me that you want me to hear, and I'll hear it in here on a microphone on the speakers. And we thought, well, okay, we'll do that. And he said, I don't have time to break away from my show, so we'll just do it that way. So we set up and tune up and whatever, and finally he gives us a signal, and we cut out on something. I don't know what we played, but probably a Five Royales tune or something. And he said, got on the talk back, and he said, that's pretty good. Could you do one more? We said, well, yeah. And so we cut out on another song. And what we didn't know was that he liked it enough that he put it out on the air. Now, I don't know if you can do that today, but he was able to do it in those days. Wow. And he waves and he says, come on in here. And we're going, you got to be kidding. These people are calling about us. He said, well, I kind of put that last song out on the air, and everybody wants to know who you are. So he says, is it just the two of you, or do you have a bass player and a drummer? We said, no. And he said, well, if you at least find yourself a drummer, he said, I'll put you on one of my sock hops. And, man, we scrambled around school and finally found this kid. I think he was in the 9th grade. Charlie and I were in the 11th grade. So he was pretty young, a pretty young freshman at Messick. And he had been taking drum lessons probably about 3 months or something. And his drum teacher won't mean anything to you guys, but it does to me. They called him Old Man Poe. And he was about 70 or 80 years old. And but anyway, found out that his dad had a kind of a little trio or whatever, about 3 or 4 guys that got together every Monday over his house. He said, why don't you come over to the house? He said, you guys can't play with a band, but you can hear my dad's band. And so we go over there and hear them play a little country bluegrass. We're going, that ain't quite our style, but anyway. And so we started rehearsing at Terry Johnson's house in his den every Saturday. And then Doug Dunn came up. He wanted to play guitar, and he just couldn't grasp it. But Doug had been banging on a ukulele for years around the house. And one day he shows up at rehearsal with a bass, with a 4-string bass. And I guess 4 strings meant something more to Doug than 6 strings. And he fell right in and just started playing the right notes for the changes and all that. We started playing, doing some gigs around town. And one day this kid come up to me in school, and he says, hey, I hear you guys have a pretty good band. And I said, well, we like to think so. He said, well, I want to be in your band. And I said, well, we're not really looking for anybody. What do you play? And he said, I play saxophone. I said, really? I said, well, we're not looking for more, but I'm curious, how long have you been playing? He said, oh, I've been taking lessons about 3 months. And I'm going, oh, not another one. Here we go. Some conversation, he said his uncle had a recording studio in North Memphis. I went, what? A recording studio? Yeah, he's got a recording studio. It amounted to having some recording equipment in a garage, but to us, it was a big-time recording studio. And his name was Charles Axton. He turned out to be pretty famous. And I said, can you be at rehearsal this Saturday over at Terry Johnson's house? And he said, well, yeah. So all of a sudden, Charles Axton was in the band, Charles Packy Axton. And so his uncle got together with his mother, Estelle Axton, and she wanted to, Jim wanted to borrow the money to get a better place for a studio instead of his garage. And she says, well, Jim, I'll mortgage my house and let you have the money if I can have a record shop up front. And that turned out to be Satellite Records, and the rest turned out to be, the Satellite Recording Studios. And we found out that later we put one record out and got a letter from a lawyer saying, we already have Satellite recorded, registered, copyrighted. Uh-oh. So they sat up all night long trying to come up with a name, and they came up with Stuart Axton, S-T-A-X. That's where Stax came from. Been with them ever since. I'm still on the board of the Stax Museum and very proud of it. We're going to go down next week, I think, or week after next, and do some stuff. And we've got next year a 50th of not a 50th, but a 10th anniversary of the museum being open, and we're going to do some work there. And I'm going down to work with the academy with some of their students and do a little little lecture, a little workout with them. So we stay involved, and they're moving right along. The museum is fantastic. I would suggest if you ever get a chance to see it, you will want to see it. You want to spend all day and maybe the next day there.
Yeah, definitely sounds awesome.
So you did a lot of things within Stax. You were playing, you're writing, playing with a bunch of different people. I guess, how did you balance it all? And can you give us a few favorites of maybe who you played with?
Well, I played with about everybody that ever came through the door. But yeah, I did a lot of things. I swept the floors and I logged the tapes. And originally, the way I got in there was I offered myself, would Miss Axton hire me to be a salesman in the record shop, which I did that. And when I'd take a break, I'd go back and clean up and, just tidy things up before I really got into the recording part of it. And this kept going on. And then they needed somebody to audition, local talent and anybody that wanted to drive in and come in. And we started having auditions on Saturday. And, I'd take probably from 10 o'clock in the morning till about noontime, a couple of hours on Saturday, to listen to people, sing, listen to their songs and see what they had and see if they had any potential. And I did that. In the meantime, I had been playing sessions across town some and then wound up playing some sessions at Stax. I mean, there, I don't think about discriminating as to who might have been the best or best artists. They were all great. I remember the first actual paid session I played on at Stax was a blues artist named Prince Conley, and the song was called "I'm Going Home." It was a kind of a neat little guitar bass line thing, and it just went from there. I mean, the more we worked, the more people came, and the more success we had, the more artists we had, and the more we had to play, and that all led into the greatest in the world, from Rufus Thomas, Carla Thomas, William Bell, Johnny Taylor, and then on into Wilson Pickett and Don Corvée and Otis Redding. And my good buddy Eddie Floyd, Al Bell, said, I've got this artist I've known for a long, long time from the Falcons, and you and him together, he writes all the time, you guys would be great together. So he brought him down, and we got a room up at the Lorraine Motel, and lo and behold, we just started writing like crazy. We wrote quite a few songs, and of course, one of our biggest ones, I guess you'd say, would be Knock on Wood, but it just kind of progressed. I mean, there was no real timeline on it. I don't know. I got to write with Otis very seldom because we didn't get him too often. He was always on the road, on a big demand for Otis for live shows, and he would come in one afternoon, check in the motel. We'd write literally all night long and maybe get an hour and a half sleep, or I'd run home, take a quick shower, and come back and be ready to record by 11 o'clock and record all day long. Usually the guys had to leave around, at the latest, around 6 because they had to get home, get something to eat, get a shower, and be on the stage, most of them by 8 o'clock, and play 4 or 5 sets a night. So that's just kind of the way the routine was around there. And Otis and I would go have some lunch or dinner and quick snack and get back to Lorraine Motel or the Holiday Inn where we were staying and start writing again all night if we were fortunate enough to get Otis for a couple of days. And I remember one time we were really pressed to get an album done. So Jim said, guys, Otis has got to be out of here tomorrow. The bus and his band is coming to pick him up early tomorrow morning for him to do a gig tomorrow night. It's a long way away, and we're going to have to finish this album. And I'm going to have to ask you guys, when you get off of your gig tonight, to come back to the studio, and we'll just cut until we get done. And that's what they did. Duck used to talk about it all the time, that one of his favorite times is when we all came back in there about 2 o'clock in the morning and started recording Otis Redding. And Otis and I wrote up until that time. I can't remember what all the ones that were on there, but we kind of recorded a lot of stuff, especially with Otis, under pressure, meaning that we just didn't have a lot of time. And we had to accept some of the takes because we didn't have time to spend all day long on it. And that's probably what keeps it, not with a lot of mistakes, but the feeling of it keeps it pretty raw and pretty fresh. And you have to understand that we were in a time where we didn't do hardly any overdubs. We weren't capable, didn't have a machine to do it. Finally, later, we got all the way up to went from a 2-track to a 4-track. So we had mono for most of it, and a 2-track when stereo came in real big, and then finally we had a 4-track, and we would split the band track in half, make it a stereo, put the vocal on one, and leave one track open for backgrounds or sound effects or whatever later.
Wow.
That's the way we recorded.
Well, around that time when Stax was first kind of coming into prominence, Otis Redding was really kind of the guy that was maybe your star. When he died, what would you say the blow to Stax was? I mean, how devastating was that to the label?
Well, like anything, it was extremely devastating. He was the best and the biggest and probably sold the most records anybody we had, but we had a very large roster. I think at one time on Stax, we had about 17 artists that we were working with. Now, along with, the success we had, what little time we had to record instrumentally with Booker, we sold a lot of records with Booker T and the FGs. We kind of reigned there for about 7 or 8 years as the number one instrumental group in America, or in the world maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So album-wise and everything, Booker T and the MGs sold a lot of records. So yes, I mean, Otis would have always been devastating, I mean, no matter what. But we still had a string of hits, and we had, Rufus was always coming up with something. Carla would have a good hit. We had people like the Mad Lads. We had Sam and Dave. We had Johnny Taylor, Eddie Floyd. And we reached a point where we didn't do any outside recording anymore. So we did not record Don Corvée anymore. We didn't record Wilson Pickett anymore. That's pretty much it. We didn't do a lot of outside recording anyway. We just didn't have time to do it. So yeah, Otis was devastating to everybody because he was everybody's greatest friend. Of all the artists that we had on Stax, even though it was, business and very set aside, it was like when everybody knew Otis was coming, it was like, hey man, it's going to be Christmas. Otis just put everybody in a good mood, and the musicians, they weren't there just to pick up a check for recording. They couldn't wait to play behind Otis Redding again. It just seemed to mean something to everybody. And so yeah, it was a pretty good shock treatment. And I would say probably the toughest thing I ever had to do is when Atlantic called and said, we've got to get out an Otis Redding record right away. I mean, I figured, you're going to have to give me a couple of months to get over this. No, they wanted it now, within 24 hours.
Wow.
And I told them, I said, I can't do it today, guys. I said, there's just no way. I couldn't concentrate if I did. So I went in on they said, just give us the best thing you got. And I said, well, okay. And Otis and I had already talked about, we knew what the hit was. And so I went in on a Tuesday morning at about 7 o'clock and started working on the song. And at Wednesday morning, about the same time, I went to the airport there in Memphis and handed it to a flight attendant with a plane that was going to go nonstop to LaGuardia Airport. And when she got off the plane, she handed the tape, the master, to a representative from Atlantic Records. They took it, listened to it, cut parts on it, put it in a vat. And we had records out on it in about 5 days. Now, that was on, 10, 11, that was December the 12th, and then Christmas was coming up. Now, history books will tell you that the record got its award and came out in 1968. But we actually were able to get some records to some disc jockeys before Christmas that year.
Wow.
In 67. But it didn't actually hit up the charts until 68, and I think it was, number one for about 2 or 3 weeks, I believe. One of the longest-running songs in the Billboard charts.
Well, with you being in the house band for Stax, I mean, you played on so many songs that are so big to so many people, but did you ever feel similar to like the Funk Brothers with Motown? You guys were sort of like unsung heroes being on all these hits? Did that ever bother you? Or?
Well, no. And I'll tell you why. I think where we were a little luckier than the Funk Brothers, we were artists as well. Within a time frame, we always had a current instrumental out there that was going up the charts and selling, and we were receiving royalty checks on a regular basis and that sort of thing. So the MGs, Booker T and the MGs, were as much artists almost as the other artists, as the artists that sing. So we didn't get that feeling of being left out. I'm sure we had some guys there that did, some of the other players, especially the guys in the horn section. Now, we tried to cut them in on marquee stuff where they received some royalties and got their songwriters and so forth, And probably nothing was as successful as, let's say, an Otis Redding. I mean, that was just way big. What can I say? And we were in a time when, we had so many records that sold 900-something thousand, we never got paid for $1 million. And I remember calling up to New York one time to Jerry Wexler. Well, he was vice president of Atlantic Records. And I said, Jerry, have you seen Billboard this week? And I called him probably noon because we always got ours, when the mail come at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. He said, no, I haven't seen it. And I said, well, you better look at it. I said, Seesaw is up there with a bullet. When it gets a bullet, it means it sold 1 million records. He said, really? I said, you better look at it. It wasn't a misprint either, because they would always pay you on 900-something records, 900-something thousand. I'm not knocking them. I just think it's funny. And you know what? I never did get my gold record for Seesaw. And that's okay. But that's just history, and that's one of those things, you know. But, that was a very, very good question, and I always felt a little, and I still do, that some of the guys that were very vital to the makeup of a certain song, and that, to me, their part was just as important as anybody else's. But usually the way that business works is that the songwriters, the artist, get the bulk of the producer. The producer makes money, the publishing company makes money, the artist and the songwriter, and that's about it. It doesn't split any other way unless they are actually on the contract. So, too bad. I always felt guilty and was always trying to campaign and champion for the artist, because once that record was done and then somebody else would cover their great hit, well, those people made money, but the artist never did make any more money. And most of the time the publisher would make money and the writer would make money, but the artist didn't. And I think today, the way they log stuff today, the artist does get to participate in the royalties of a song that he helped make famous.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good change.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, after the Stax, you went on to really cement your name and worked with a lot of other people. And
right.
I think one group that a lot of people would know you from would be the Blues Brothers. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the only thing different about them was the fact, I don't know what was different. I mean, they could sing and they were artists, but they were also well-known comedians. And of course, our first success with the Blues Brothers was A Briefcase Full of Blues, which was just an album. But it did sell 3.5-4 million copies, which is pretty big. And I think the leverage from that and the pressure from Atlantic, they were allowed to get their script done and go to work on a movie. So that was pretty cool. The way I look at it from a musical standpoint, with Duck and I, we were working with some of the greatest musicians in the world out of New York and stuff. And he and I were really just playing the same stuff we've been playing all of our lives. I mean, nothing really changed. We didn't sit down one day and create some new sound or something. We just kind of let it go on. And I'll tell you a little quick story, which is a very true story. The first day that I got up there to rehearse with the guys up in New York, and I think they had been rehearsing for a couple of days. So anyway, I get off the elevator at SIR, and Duck grabs me. The minute I got off the elevator, the band had taken a break, and I guess somebody called us, and Cropper's on his way from the airport, so they just kind of took a break. So Duck grabs me when I got off the elevator, and he pulls me over in the corner and says, I got to talk to you. And I said, what, Duck? I'm just getting here. What's going on? He said, man, they're in there doing all these old blues songs that nobody ever heard of. He said, you're going to have to go in there and talk to those boys. I went, oh, man, okay. Well, I'm glad you told me. So I said, well, let me get in there and feel things out and see how it's going. I'll see what you're talking about. So anyway, so we go on in there, and they played one of the songs they'd just been working on, and it was fine. And so I let them go for a little bit, and they're just standing there singing and playing. And it's Schaefer and Jordan and Duck and the horns and everybody. And it just hit me from what Duck had told me earlier. I said, hey, guys, have you thought about doing anything, since it's two of you out there, have you thought about doing anything sort of like Sam and Dave would do? And they go, well, what's that? And I said, well, Sam and Dave always did. I mean, they were great ballad singers, too, but they always did a song that they could both get into and dance to. And I said, that was part of their whole deal, was their dancing. You guys ought to dance more. And so Belushi says, well, what would you suggest? And I said, I don't know. And I looked at Duck, and looked at Schaefer, and I said, well, you know Soul Man, don't you? Paul said, yeah. So I hit it, and so they immediately start doing exactly what you see in the movie, sort of like none of the steps were coordinated. It was just sort of this goofy, wild dancing stuff. And they get through with Soul Man, and we're all laughing and clowning around and had a good time. And I said, well, that won't go very far. And Belushi said, man, I really like that. And, man, the next thing, we got the whole band working on it, doing the whole thing. And so we keep working this song, and they keep coming up with the steps, and they dance with each other, doing all this stuff. They just sort of put a new energy in the whole project. And so they said, well, that's it, guys, man. Let's just break, and everybody do what they want to do. And, so everybody started breaking down their instruments, and I put my guitar in my case. And Belushi comes over and hands me a tape. He said, Cropper, I want an arrangement on this. And I went and And it was B-Movie Boxcar Blues, Elwood McClinton song, which I had never heard. So I took it back to the hotel that night after dinner, and I pulled it out, put my headphones on, and cranked it up and listened to it, and I went, I have never heard this song before. How are we going to do this with the Blues Brothers? So anyway, we came up with a pretty interesting little arrangement of it. Delbert will forgive us for it, but it turned out to be pretty good. And one of the band's favorites, I know Alan Rubin said it was his favorite song of the Blues Brothers, was B-Movie Boxcar Blues.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's a pretty interesting arrangement.
Well,
something special just for you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's a good story. Now, you've been a member of so many Hall of Fames, greatest guitar players lists, all kinds of stuff. Did you ever imagine that you would have this kind of impact on the world of music?
No, not my wildest dreams. I figured I'd be pumping gas or sweeping floors somewhere, still being a stock boy at a grocery store. I never thought it'd go any further than it did. I mean, I had aspirations, but I didn't think it ever happened. And we had a little success, with the high school band. And later, after we graduated, we had part of that band. We had the song "Last Night," which I think was number 3 in the nation or something, and that was in 1961, the year before Green Onions. And I'm going, man, we finally made it. Now, we didn't do it with the whole band. We did it with some of the studio musicians who we felt were more seasoned and knew a lot more than we did, which turned out to be the case. And Floyd Newman played on it, and Gilbert Caples, but also our horn players, Packy Axton, played on it, and Wayne Jackson played trumpet on it. And Smoochie Jerry Lee Smith played the piano and the organ, and Chips decided he didn't want a guitar on it. And so the history books say that, well, I wasn't on the record because there's no guitar on it. But the fact is, I play the whole note on the organ when Smoochie's solo on. I just hold down a C note on the organ.
Oh, yeah.
Because he couldn't play and hold the note down at the same time. And I always say, well, that was before the matchbook trick. But that's a whole other story in itself.
Oh, that's great.
Too funny.
Well, Steve, we got to say it's been a great honor to be talking with you today.
You bet. My pleasure. I love telling those old stories. And, I wish my buddy Duck was around to hear some of them. And it's kind of tough telling them without him,
Yeah.
without him in mind. So he was right there with me through the whole time. So he was always a great supporter, and he loved this music. He just loved it more than anybody, I think. Very protective of it. So he was good at it. So I don't know. Hopefully I'll get to see Aykroyd coming up pretty soon. And he had called me after Duck had passed away, and he said, I'm thinking about coming to Nashville and recording some stuff, so I'm going to be calling you. So I'm still waiting on that call. That'll be pretty cool if he does. And I'm going out with the Animals in January again. A lot of people don't know that I've been working with them a little bit. The original Animals from
Wow.
England. And this will be my 3rd tour with them. And I'm really looking forward to it. I think we open January the 9th through about February the 21st. Not a long tour, but it's just fun stuff. And they've got so many hits. And then they play behind me on some of my stuff, Dock of the Bay and Midnight Hour and so forth. And we just have a lot of fun together. So
Yeah, it
I
sounds
decided I'd
great.
go out. And, the Blues Brothers Band, the original Blues Brothers Band, of course, without Belushi and Aykroyd, we crank back up again, I think, in March. And this will be coming up next year, 2013, will be 26 years in a row we've played with this band.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, I appreciate it, guys, and any help you can give us, any airplay or any pointers, I really appreciate it, and I know the band appreciates it, and thanks for having me on.
It's been an honor having you on.
Oh, my pleasure, guys.
All right.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks, guys. You have a great day.
You
All right,
too.
you
Thank
too.
you.
Bye-bye.